Wyoming Territory. 1883, the sun was just tipping over the edge of the hills when Lorne reined in his horse behind the general store in Casper. He had come for oats and a new pair of gloves, but stopped short when he noticed movement by the trash barrels behind the building. A figure crouched low, digging through scraps and broken crates like a wild animal. Isaiah narrowed his eyes. It was a woman, thin, trembling, wearing a threadbare shawl that looked more like a rag. She moved fast, her hands shaking as she pulled out a dented tin can and sniffed at it. Then she tossed it aside and kept rummaging. He swung off his horse and stepped forward. "Ma'am," she startled like a deer, scrambling to her feet. Her eyes darted toward him, wide, dark, and tired. Her hands clutched the edge of the barrel like she might have to use it to defend herself. "I am not here to hurt you," Isaiah said, holding up both hands. What are you looking for?" The woman swallowed hard. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "I just needed milk for my baby." Isaiah blinked. "Milk?" Her eyes welled up, but she blinked fast, holding it in. "He is 3 months old. I have not eaten since yesterday morning. I thought maybe someone threw out a bit of canned milk. Anything." Isaiah looked closer. There was a bundled shape behind her, tucked inside a worn basket near the wall. A small baby wrapped in a faded quilt, cheeks flushed from the cold, tiny fists curled tight. He took a slow breath. "What is your name?" "Gracelyn Zeller," she said. "Please, I am not stealing. I was just trying." Isaiah's jaw tightened. "You are freezing." "That baby is freezing." She turned, crouched quickly, and tucked the blanket tighter around the child. "We will be all right." "No, you will not," he said. "Come on." She looked up, alarmed. "Where?" "I have a cabin just outside town. It is warm. I have food. Milk. You and your son can come." "I do not know you." "No," Isaiah said, "you do not. But I am not leaving you out here like this. Not with a baby." Gracelyn hesitated, staring at him like she was trying to see through his skin. Then she looked down at the baby, whose small lips moved in his sleep, searching for something to suck. "All right," she whispered. "Just for tonight." Isaiah nodded. "Can you ride?" She gave a tight nod. He helped her up into the saddle in front of him, cradling the baby in her arms. The little one stirred but did not cry. Isaiah held the reins steady, careful not to jostle them too much as he guided his horse out of the alley and toward the edge of town. The ride was silent except for the wind and the baby's soft breaths. Gracelyn leaned forward slightly, shielding her child from the wind with her body. Isaiah felt her shaking and wrapped his coat tighter around both of them. His cabin sat in a grove of pine trees, smoke curling from the chimney. Inside it was warm and simple, just one room, a stove, a cot, a table, and a rocking chair. Isaiah set her down gently and reached for the kettle. "Sit," he said. "You need heat first, then we will feed him." Gracelyn lowered herself into the rocking chair, her arms cradling the baby close. Her cheeks were flushed, her lips cracked. She did not speak, just watched him with guarded eyes. Isaiah poured hot water into a basin and set it near her feet. He handed her a clean cloth. "Wipe down. I will get milk ready." She nodded, her hands unsteady. Isaiah opened the cupboard and pulled out a can of condensed milk. He stirred it with warm water and found a rubber nipple in the drawer. He had kept it from when his sister stayed with him 2 years ago with her newborn, before they moved to Cheyenne. He knelt beside her and held out the bottle. Gracelyn took it carefully, then offered it to the baby. The child latched on fast, sucking hungrily. Isaiah sat back on his heels, watching. "What is his name?" "Aven," she whispered. "Aven Zeller." Isaiah nodded. "He is strong." "You are doing right by him." Her eyes filled again, and this time a tear slipped down her cheek. She looked away quickly, brushing it aside. "His father died 3 months ago, same day he was born." Isaiah's chest tightened. "I am sorry. I had nowhere to go." I tried to stay with my aunt in Laramie, but she turned me out. Said a widow with a bastard child was not her burden. Isaiah clenched his jaw. He is not a burden. Gracelyn looked up at him, her eyes shining with something between defiance and heartbreak. He is all I have. Then we will make sure he has what he needs, Isaiah said. You both will. Her eyes searched his face again, slower this time. Why are you doing this? Isaiah leaned back, resting against the wall, because no woman should have to dig through trash for her baby. And because I would want someone to do the same for my sister if it were her. Gracelyn looked down at Aven, who had fallen asleep against her chest. She rocked gently, her fingers brushing over the baby's downy hair. I can work, she said softly. I can clean, so cook whatever you need. Isaiah shook his head. You need to rest first. Eat, get your strength back. We will talk about work later. She gave him a long look, not suspicion anymore, but something softer, like the first flicker of trust. All right, she said. Isaiah stood and turned his back, giving her space as she settled into the rocker. He pulled bread from the tin and sliced it, setting out some dried apples and jerky on the table. When he turned back, she had dozed off, her chin resting against her shoulder. Aven curled up against her chest. The fire crackled. Snow began to fall outside, soft and steady. Isaiah watched them for a moment, then quietly pulled a blanket over her shoulders. He sat in the corner chair, arms crossed, eyes on the woman who had walked into his life from behind a trash barrel. He did not know what would happen next, but he knew one thing: he was not letting her go back to the streets. Not now. Not ever. Morning came slow, dragging gray light across the pine-shaded windows. Isaiah had been up since before dawn, splitting kindling outside with his coat collar turned high. Steam curled from his breath as he paused, listening to the soft creak of the cabin door opening behind him. Gracelyn stepped out. Aven swaddled tight against her chest with a strip of muslin she'd knotted over one shoulder. Her hair was brushed back, still damp, and her face held the pale, worn look of someone newly fed but not yet rested. I didn't want to sleep so long, she said, eyes squinting against the cold. You needed it, Isaiah said, setting down the maul. She shifted Aven higher on her chest. He woke me twice in the night. I tried to be quiet. I heard. He bent to gather the wood, didn't mind. She watched as he stacked the split logs into a sling. You live alone? I do, Gracelyn hesitated. How long? 6 years now. Isaiah slung the firewood over his shoulder. Since my sister left with her family. Before that, I was working cattle down near Sweetwater. Came up here when I got tired of the noise. She followed him back inside, standing near the stove as he added logs. The cabin warmed quick, the scent of pine sap rising with the heat. Isaiah poured her a cup of coffee and handed it over without comment. She wrapped her hands around the tin cup, saying nothing for a while. Aven stirred faintly, his cheek pressed against the muslin. What happened to his father? Isaiah asked, voice quiet. Gracelyn stared into the steam. He was a ranch hand. We married the winter before Aven came. He drowned in a cattle pond during the spring thaw. They didn't find him for 3 days. Isaiah didn't speak. He stirred the pot on the stove instead, letting the silence settle. I worked laundry in Laramie, she went on. But when the baby came early, I couldn't stand through a shift. They let me go. He nodded once. You planning to stay in Casper? I was trying to get to Thermopolis. A woman there, my mother's cousin, might take us in, but it's still near 100 miles. I ran out of money 2 weeks ago. He ladled porridge into a bowl, set it in front of her. You'll stay here until you're strong enough to decide what comes next. Gracelyn didn't reach for the spoon right away. You don't know me. I could leave in the night with your horse. You won't. She looked at him then, something unreadable in her face. You trust too easy. Isaiah leaned against the table. No. But I've seen people turn hard from being left too long out in the cold. Gracelyn fed herself carefully, chewing slow, eyes flicking to Aven's sleeping face. When she finished, she rose, folding the muslin tighter around her son. "Can I wash something for you?" she asked. "Cook, mend?" Isaiah shook his head. "You'll rest today, but if you want you can help me string fence tomorrow," she blinked. "You'd let me? I've seen women mend tack and drive cattle cleaner than most men. If you've got hands and a back, that's enough." She nodded once, almost like she didn't trust the movement. "I'll do what I can." Isaiah put on his coat. "I've got to check the traps down in the hollow. There's bread warming by the stove if Aven wakes hungry." Gracelyn's voice stopped him at the door. "You're not what I expected," she said. He glanced back. "What you expect? Either pity or suspicion. You've given me neither." Isaiah's mouth drew into a slow line. "I figure you've had enough of both." He stepped out into the snow, the door closing soft behind him. Inside, Gracelyn stood still, the firelight casting her in gold. She touched Aven's tiny hand, her expression caught somewhere between caution and something gentler. She didn't sit, not yet. But she didn't leave either. The next morning, the air bit sharper. Clouds hung low over the hills, hinting at heavier snow by nightfall. Isaiah tightened the cinch on his bay gelding, glancing toward the cabin window. Gracelyn stood behind the glass, Aven bundled in her arms, her gaze steady as she watched him prepare. She stepped outside before he could call for her, a scarf tied firm around her head and a canvas coat that hung loose on her frame. "You still want the help?" Isaiah handed her a pair of leather gloves. "If you're up to it." She nodded once, no hesitation this time. Aven stayed wrapped against her chest, his little body tucked close beneath the coat. Isaiah led them west across the snow-dusted meadow, where the fence line curved down toward the creek. A pair of crows lifted from a cottonwood as they approached, their shadows passing briefly over the frozen ground. They worked in silence for a while. Isaiah held the wire taut while Gracelyn hammered staples into the posts. Her grip was awkward at first, but her strikes grew steadier with each swing. Aven slept through the task, the rhythm of the work seeming to soothe him. "You ever done any fencing before?" Isaiah asked, checking the tension along the stretch they'd just finished. "I watched my husband do it once. He said it was half strength, half patience." She brushed a strand of wind-blown hair from her cheek. "I never got to try." Isaiah eyed the line. "You're quick to learn." She gave a short nod, then crouched to gather a stray coil of wire. "You ever marry?" "No." He didn't elaborate and she didn't press. They moved down to the next post. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of juniper and distant wood smoke. Gracelyn paused, adjusting Aven's position as he stirred. "He's warm," she said, more to herself than him. "That's all I care about." Isaiah handed her a fresh staple. "You always want more than one thing, even when you're telling yourself you don't." She didn't answer at first. Then softly, "I used to want a piano, not to play for anyone, just for me, a small one with ivory keys." Isaiah glanced at her. "You play, not well." "My father taught me a few hymns before he passed. I used to practice after supper while my mother did her mending." She looked out across the field. "I haven't touched one in years." "You ever want to again?" She shrugged, but the motion was half-hearted. "I don't think about it much." "Maybe you should." Gracelyn looked at him, her mouth drawing into a line that said she wasn't sure what to make of that. But she didn't turn away. By early afternoon, the light dimmed and the wind picked up. Isaiah called it before the flurries started, helping Gracelyn onto the horse while he led them back. The snow came light at first, whispering against the pine needles. By the time they reached the cabin, it had thickened into a steady fall. Inside, Gracelyn peeled off her coat and unwrapped Aven, who blinked sleepily and reached for her collar. Isaiah stoked the fire and set beans on the stove with leftover ham from the smokehouse. As the cabin warmed, Gracelyn settled into the chair by the hearth, Aven tucked into the crook of her arm. She watched the flames for a long while before speaking. He was born early. I wasn't ready. I didn't have anything, no crib, no clothes that fit. Her voice was low, the words more breath than sound. A neighbor in Laramie gave me a sack of flour and a boiled egg the day we came home from the midwife. That was all. Isaiah sat across from her, elbows resting on his knees. You kept him warm, fed him best you could. That's more than some children get. She didn't respond, but her eyes stayed on his. He reached for a tin of salve from the shelf and held it out. Your knuckles are split. Gracelyn held out her hand without protest. He rubbed the ointment across her skin, his touch careful. Aven's tiny fingers twitched against her sleeve. You always this quiet? She asked, a slight smile tugging at one corner of her mouth. Isaiah looked up. Talking's never changed much for me. Gracelyn studied him. I think you see more than you let on, maybe. She shifted Aven against her chest, her features softening as the baby sighed in his sleep. I don't know what tomorrow looks like, she said, but for the first time in a long while I'm not dreading it. Isaiah didn't answer at once. He looked at her, really looked at the curve of her hand over her child's back, at the quiet strength rooted in her shoulders. You don't have to rush out of here, he said. There's room enough for the both of you, for as long as you need. Gracelyn didn't speak this time. She just nodded, slow and sure, and reached for the blanket to drape it over Aven. Outside, the snow thickened, muffling the world. But inside it was warm. And still. And safe. The snow held through the night and into the next afternoon, blanketing the ridge and the low pasture in silence. Isaiah spent the morning clearing the path to the well while Gracelyn tended to the washing inside, Aven resting nearby in a crate lined with wool. The baby had begun to stir more often, eyes opening wider, the faintest coos rising when Gracelyn leaned over him. By mid-afternoon, Isaiah returned with a pail of water and his coat damp from brushing against the fir branches. He stomped off the snow and stepped inside, pausing when he saw Gracelyn stitching at the table. Her needle moved with a practiced rhythm, her brow drawn in concentration. Where'd you learn to do that? He asked, setting the bucket down near the stove. My mother taught me on flour sacks, Gracelyn said without looking up. She'd unpick old seams before the sun rose, said wasting thread was a sin. Isaiah pulled off his gloves. She's still living. She passed the year I married. Gracelyn tied off the thread and folded the shirt she'd mended. Cancer took her slow. Isaiah didn't press. He crouched by the stove and added 2 more logs, the dry poplar cracking as the flames took hold. I've got some oilcloth in the loft, he said after a pause. Thinking to patch the shed roof before the freeze sets in deep. Gracelyn glanced toward the window. You'll need help lifting the ladder. Isaiah shook his head. Too slick to risk 2 up there. She set down the shirt. Then I'll steady the base. That or you fall trying to be proud. He looked over at her and let out a quiet breath through his nose. All right. Outside, the wind had dropped, and the snow settled into a soft hush beneath their boots. Isaiah carried the ladder while Gracelyn trailed behind. Her coat tugged close against the cold. Aven stayed warm inside, wrapped in a wool wrap and watched over by the hound that had taken to sleeping near his crate. At the shed, Isaiah propped the ladder and checked the braces. Gracelyn braced the sides with her hands, her boots planted firm in the drift. He climbed carefully, lifting the oilcloth with one arm, hammer tucked into his belt. The roof creaked beneath his weight but held steady. You've been here long, Gracelyn called up. Since I left cattle work, Isaiah said, pressing the cloth to the worn boards. You ever think of leaving? The hammer paused mid-swing. No. She didn't say anything else until he climbed down, his shoulders dusted with snow. "You don't miss people?" she asked then. He met her eyes. "Sometimes, but I never liked the kind that only showed up when they needed something." Gracelyn nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "I know that kind." They walked back slow, the snow crunching underfoot. Inside, Aven had begun to fuss, his face scrunched, his mouth open in silent demand. Gracelyn picked him up and rocked gently, her palm cupping the back of his head. Isaiah crouched by the hearth, turning a pan of cornbread on the coals. "You ever think about staying put?" Gracelyn didn't answer right away. She shifted Aven to her other arm and sat down at the table. "I used to think the only way to stay safe was to keep moving. And now," she looked over at him, "now I don't know, this place doesn't feel dangerous." Isaiah stood, setting a plate of food down in front of her. "That's something." They ate quietly, the fire warm behind them. Aven fell asleep in her arms, his tiny breath steady and even. After the plates were cleared and the shutters latched, Gracelyn sat near the stove, her eyes on the dancing light across the floorboards. "You said your sister left 6 years ago," she said. "You ever visit her?" Isaiah leaned against the window frame, arms folded. "Once a year. She writes sometimes. They're settled in Cheyenne now." "You have anyone else?" "No." Gracelyn looked down at Aven. "I think about what it'll be like when he's older. When he asks why we lived the way we did." Isaiah was quiet for a moment. "You'll tell him the truth, that his mother kept going when most would have quit." She didn't look up, but her fingers tightened around the blanket. He stepped closer. "You don't owe anyone an apology for surviving." Gracelyn lifted her eyes, and something unspoken passed between them, less like a spark and more like a steady light catching in the dark. She didn't speak, but her shoulders eased, and for the first time she didn't look like she was bracing for something to be taken away. Isaiah stoked the fire once more before retiring to his cot. Gracelyn settled Aven into the crate, then sat beside it, back against the wall, legs drawn up. Neither said good night, but neither looked away. The thaw came late that April, slow and reluctant, like the land itself had forgotten how to soften. The river behind the cabin swelled with melt, whispering through the trees with a voice Isaiah hadn't heard in months. The snow retreated in patches, revealing earth matted with needles and old frostbitten grass. From the window, Gracelyn watched the last of the ice slide off the eaves and shatter on the stoop. Isaiah had gone out early with his mule hitched to the sledge, hauling the remaining split pine down to the barn. She could see him from the doorway, steady, deliberate, his shoulders moving beneath his shirt, long sleeves rolled and damp at the cuffs. Aven stirred against her hip, heavier now, cheeks round and flushed with the kind of health she hadn't dared hope for when she first arrived. She adjusted his sling and stepped outside, the sun catching the hem of her skirt as it brushed through the wet grass. "You've got moss growing behind your barn," she called, stepping around the puddles. Isaiah paused, straightening. "That's so. Means the ground's going soft. Might be time to plant." He nodded. "I was thinking the same. Got an old seed crate in the loft. Might be enough for a kitchen patch." She crossed the yard, pausing beside him. "You ever plant before?" "Only once." He unhooked the sledge. "Didn't take. Frost came early." Gracelyn adjusted Aven's sling. "I can help. I know what holds through cool nights. My mother used to say cabbage and carrots have more sense than people." Isaiah smiled faintly, wiping his hands on a rag. "Then we'll put the smart ones in first." They spent the rest of the afternoon clearing the patch of earth beside the shed. Gracelyn worked on her knees with a hand hoe, Aven napping soundly in a laundry basket she'd lined with wool. Isaiah dug rows with a spade, his boots sinking into the thawed topsoil. They didn't speak much, just worked in rhythm, the kind that settled into the bones without effort. As dusk crept in, she stood and brushed the dirt from her skirt, glancing over at him. "You think you'll ever go back to cattle?" Isaiah leaned on the spade. "I did my share. I don't miss the dust." She tilted her head. "What would you do if you weren't here?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I don't think I'd be anywhere else." Gracelyn's fingers curled around the edge of the basket, her gaze dropping to Aven's sleeping face. "I never thought I'd be still this long. I don't know what it means yet." Isaiah stepped closer, his voice low. "It might mean you've landed." Her breath caught somewhere between rib and throat. "I keep waiting to feel like I'm trespassing." "You're not." She looked up then, and something passed between them, a quiet certainty, not rushed, not forced. A knowing. That night, after Aven was put down and the fire built high against the last chill, she stood at the window while Isaiah cleaned his tools. "I've been thinking," she said, not turning. He waited. "About staying," she continued. "Not for a night. Not until the weather turns. Just staying." Isaiah didn't answer right away. He rinsed the spade, set it to dry, then crossed the room to stand beside her. "I was hoping you'd say that." She turned to face him, eyes steady, mouth drawn tight with something that looked like both relief and fear. "I haven't had much that lasted," she said. "You've got me now." He reached for her hand and she let him take it. No hesitation, no flinch. They sat by the fire after that, her hand still in his, Aven breathing soft in the basket nearby. The world outside felt far away, like something they'd already walked through and left behind. In the weeks that followed, the garden grew. So did Aven, who began to laugh, a soft, surprising sound that made Isaiah stop mid-step and grin without quite knowing it. Gracelyn took in mending from town, though she rarely rode in alone. Folks had begun to nod to her, not with pity but with recognition. She was part of something now. Isaiah built a cradle from pine, sanded smooth and carved with quiet care. When he gave it to her, she didn't speak, just traced the grain with her fingers and leaned against his shoulder afterward, her weight certain and unmoving. One late June afternoon, with wild roses blooming down by the creek, Isaiah took her hand as they walked and said, "I'd like to marry you." Gracelyn looked at him, startled. Then she laughed, a clear, sudden sound that startled the birds from the trees. "You're sure?" she asked. "I've never been more," she nodded once. "Then yes." They married beneath a cottonwood with a preacher from town and the neighbor's wife holding Aven. There was no music, no crowd, just the rustle of wind and the smell of warm grass and Isaiah's hand steady in hers. They built a life from small things, shared bread, weather watching, the soft murmur of books read aloud on long evenings. Isaiah added a second room to the cabin. Gracelyn taught him the old hymns, and sometimes when Aven was asleep, she hummed them low beside the fire. In time, the child began to call him Pa, and Isaiah, who had spent a long stretch of years not needing much, discovered a kind of fullness he hadn't known to want. Their days were not always easy, but they were theirs, woven with quiet, held together with work and warmth, and the kind of love that grew slow and deep, like roots finding purchase after a long winter. They never left that homestead, because some places weren't meant to be passed through, some places were meant to be kept.